Good afternoon. On behalf of Global Ties Alabama, we welcome you to our Global Perspectives Institute. Today's topic is such a significant one, and we're so appreciative of the work that is being done with our partner organization, the University of Alabama in Huntsville. We had a chance to meet Dr. Hunter. I guess it's been almost 2 years now. We've worked with her. We are impressed and mesmerized by her global reach, which aligns with our mission of promoting international relationships through citizen diplomacy. When we think of our topic today, resolving international parental child abduction, U.S. Mexico cooperation, the challenges and opportunities to protect children, it really opens up the dialogue about what is the truth about child abduction, and learning and becoming more aware of the topic. So many people, when you talk to them, they're immediately going to child abduction, stranger danger, and that's how we kind of train our children as they go to school. Don't talk to strangers. But what we've learned is that so many of these abductions are very close to home. And we're going to be focusing on parental child abduction. And I think we're very privileged to have the expertise of Dr. Noelle Hunter, we have been so impressed with the work of her and her leadership with I Stand Parent Network. You know, a lot of us may go through challenges in life and may be able to resolve them personally, but now to see someone who took a personal challenge and has expanded to starting an NGO that empowers parents to recover their children from international parental child abduction and to advocate for public policy reform. Kudos, Dr. Hunter, for your leadership in this arena. And each time we partner with you and it's publicized to our constituents, we find that there are close to home relationships of people who are hurting and challenged by this topic. So I will turn it over to Dr. Hunter, who will serve as our moderator today. She has a very dynamic panel, and I'm looking forward to hearing more from them. Dr. Hunter?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Director Scheib, for that wonderful and heartfelt introduction. I am a mom. I am a survivor. My daughter is a survivor of international parental child abduction. And when I was going through it from 2012 to 2014, I never would have imagined that it would turn into a life's call. As you indicated, it's enough to, just to be able to resolve an issue such as so painful and close to home as an international parental child abduction, let alone to go forward. But what I found is that, as you said, there are so many places in which this hits close to home. And so just very briefly to say how it happened to me and then introduce this panel. So my daughter, I used to live in Kentucky. I'm proud to be back home in my home state of Alabama, but I lived in Kentucky. And in 2014, my marriage to a man from Mali in West Africa broke down. And in that relationship breakdown, there was a custodial resolution and there was joint custody granted. And my ex-husband disagreed with that joint custody ruling. And on Christmas Day of 2011, I met him at a McDonald's for his part of the holiday time sharing, and I knew that moment that he was going to abduct her. He asked for her passport, even though the judge had allowed me to keep her U.S. passport because we knew that there was a risk for him taking her out of the country. But what I didn't know at the time is that he had gotten a passport for her from the nation of Mali, and because she was a dual citizen. And so on that day, December 25th of 2011, began what none of us want to go through. We call it the club that no one wants to be in. But because I have some experience, I'm a professor of political science, I lecture of political science here at the University of Alabama in Huntsville, and I understand how government works. I was able to mobilize responses from Congress, in the State Department, even in the nation that my daughter was held. And on July 11th of 2014, we were reunited and she came home. And so I've dedicated my life out of that experience to helping other parents to resolve international parental child abduction and linking up with other people like Brenda Hernandez and Carlos Alvarado, who are joining me today, to fight against this issue, to educate, to prevent it from happening, and to seek reunifications when we can. And so by way of introduction, I'd like to allow Brenda Hernandez to introduce herself, and then my dear brother and colleague, Carlos Alvarado. So Brenda, would you care to introduce yourself, please, and how you come to this issue?
Thank you, Dr. Hunter. So my name is Brenda Hernandez. I am a student in the Graduate Public Affairs and Policy program at the University in Alabama in Huntsville. I am a second-generation Mexican-American, and I will be graduating with my bachelor's degree in sociology and political science this December. I aspire to be a policy analyst for the federal government in the future. To do that, I conducted a final research project in this past spring semester with Dr. Hunter's public policy process course. I followed inadequate federal government response for IPCA in the US through a heuristic of my choosing. I opted for Sabatier's Advocacy Coalition Framework, or ACF. In short, the framework theorizes that coalitions, which are made up of various actors with various power levels and involvement with policy, push to materialize their held beliefs. The framework adapts to the dynamic public policy process, unlike a generic policy cycle, which is just illustrated by a full circle following stages. The subsystem where most of the action towards enacting policy occurs is not only affected by competing coalition beliefs, but also by the external environment. The external environment ranges from long-term stability that is least likely to change, mid-range stability that is likely to change within the next 4 to 5 years, and lastly, spontaneous events that are more short-term.
Thank you so much, Brenda. What perhaps those guests who have joined us today have heard in Brenda's research focus is how many different actors are involved when a child is abducted from the United States to another nation. And we're going to zone in on U.S. Mexico cooperation to resolve this issue. She's also, if you heard, it's a very complex issue. And so it really takes these coalitions working together, parents working with governments when they can, and working in these very complex environments to resolve abduction. So thank you so much, Brenda, for joining us today. And thank you for your research on this issue. Okay. Carlos, you are foremost a survivor of IPCA. You are an attorney. You have successfully reunited families who have been victims of this awful crime. And I understand that now you are working to try to raise the profile of this issue even more in Mexico. So please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your story and how you come to this cause.
Sure thing. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Hello. Well, my name is Carlos Alvarado. I am a Mexican lawyer. I graduated back in 1992 from La Salle University in the city of León. And I've been working in these cases, IPCA cases, for 22 years. I remember back in 2000, I was working at the Mexican consulate in Seattle, Washington. The consul, he asked me to support one Mexican citizen who came from Mexico to Seattle to attend a restitution case. And what a small world, because that father, the left behind father who traveled from Mexico to Seattle, he was my student in Mexico. So
I didn't know that.
Or in federal court, and he said, like, Carlos, so you are the guy from the consulate? I said, yeah, I'm your lawyer from the consulate. It was just, big coincidence. So while I was there listening at a hearing in a federal court in Seattle, Washington, I remember my own personal, story, because in 1975, my father wrongfully detained my brother, my older brother, and myself in the States. And then in 1976, my mother found my brother and myself in Chicago, and then just the student, without notice, without anything, abduct myself and my brother, getting back to Mexico. Obviously, it is sad because since then, I don't know anything about my dad. So while I was watching that hearing, it's like, wow, that's me, that little one was me. It's me, but many years ago. And I got so touched, deeply touched by the case. And I just decided to dedicate the majority of our law practice in these kind of cases. Our office is in the city of León, in the middle of the country. I also have a master-in-law, two master-in-law, one in human rights and another in Mexican constitutional law and amparo. And we'll talk about amparo later on this meeting.
Sure.
But basically, the amparo, I will say, is kind of similar to the habeas corpus, in the state, but with a lot more scope. Also, I teach human rights, obviously. I teach human rights, and I teach now other lawyers how to handle international restitution cases. So basically, that's my introduction. Thank you.
Okay, what a remarkable introduction. I've known you for almost 9 years now, almost a decade, and I keep learning new things. Maybe you told me, but I did not remember that your first case was your student. And, to the spirit of global ties, this is a small world. And issues like this, no matter how painful they are, give us the opportunity to see that and to, work cooperatively to resolve them. And so I definitely will be coming back to this incredible intersection between human rights and constitutional law here and in Mexico, and international parental child abduction. But I think we need to back up for just a few minutes and ask a cultural question. And I think perhaps both of you are more than qualified to comment on this. And so before we really talk about international parental child abduction, are there certain cultural beliefs or practices concerning families and children that we need to take into consideration when we're discussing IPCA cases between the U.S. and Mexico, both ways? Brenda?
One thing that comes to mind from my experience is that religion plays a major part in the everyday lives of people in Mexico, especially those in rural areas, such as my extended family. They live in rural areas and they have very traditional values. So oftentimes women are demonized for not abiding by Catholic practices or being involved with something scandalous. So children are sometimes weaponized against them. And as a form of punishment, husbands and their whole family attempt to take the children from her in some way. Correct me if I'm wrong, Carlos, but I think when a woman tries to leave an abusive household, he can go to court and claim home abandonment, and he can be liable to the custody of their children. And I believe this law applies vice versa. So I'm worried that this sort of custom is kind of repeated while in the US, or that one of the parents will leave Mexico for the US to hurt or punish the other parent.
Well, just to be like that, but fortunately there is not anymore. So, but yes, just getting back to the question, and I totally agree with Brenda. Obviously, yes, there is many issues, and I would say education, beliefs, religion, jurisdictions, domestic violence, and corruption. Yes, of course. And also, in our practice, I noticed that when we submit a case, it depends the area, but we submit the case to court and then we have to talk right away to judge. And in many cases, judges, their first belief is like, oh, poor babies, you know, they should stay with mom. They are okay here, you know, because their age, it's okay if they stay here. And that, no, it's not okay, you know, it's a crime. It's not okay. So in another jurisdictions, it's like, okay, corruption. Corruption means you have money to pay, cases can move forward. Not in many states, not in many jurisdictions, but it's kind of crazy that jurisdiction like Jalisco, you know, huge state, some areas of Mexico City, is still this kind of corruption, like you gotta pay in order to get move your case. Yeah, but also in education, you know, religion, of course. I think the majority of the people in Mexico is still Catholic, and it's very traditional, that that issue as well.
Thank you. That's very educating for some of us who may not understand maybe how those very significant and very foundational cultural influences play into either an abduction occurring or maybe more positively preventing it from occurring, when we understand and know these practices, these cultural practices and beliefs, and how they can either facilitate it in the negative sense, or maybe as we are trying to build cooperation and communications, how something like as important as religion can be used as an opportunity for prevention and education. And so thank you so much for those opening comments. Carlos, I'd like to come back to your primary experience and ask you to fast forward a little bit. And so when you were working in the Mexican consulate and you got your first case, and then you began to, as you said, devote your life to these types of child restitution cases, surely you have seen the issue over time. And so from then until now, how are the US and Mexico working, collaborating at any level, maybe the high level diplomatic level or the case-to-case level? What changes have you seen or not seen over a fairly significant amount of time?
No, I've been seeing a lot of changes. You know, I think back in the time when I started handling these cases, it was a lot of lack of communication. You know, like we cannot release communication, we cannot say anything. But nowadays, I can see a very good communications between Mexican Central Authority and USA Central Authority. And also, obviously, it's a fact that with a matter of time, both central authorities can trust law firms like our law firms, you know, since they say, oh, it's this law firm that we know they handle a lot of cases, so we can release information, we can trust this law firm. And obviously there is now many legal resources, everything is on the internet. You can click like at the State Department website and you will find a lot of statistics, a lot of legal resource. Same in Mexico, you know, you can just go and surf the internet and click and you will find a lot of resource to help you and how to submit or how to demand an international restitution case, of course. Yeah, but yeah, it's been amazing. I will say, you know, that, and I do remember my first agent from the USA Central Authority. She's not there anymore, but I think I have already an agent working with her for at least 10 years, you know, and she's still there. So yeah, that's very good as well, you know, like a steady people on that office.
I think my country officer, when I was working with the State Department, at one point handled Mexico. When offline, I'd like to tell you her name. I bet you might have worked with her. Brenda, could we pick up on something that Carlos said? Because I think we may need a little bit of education, some of us for whom this is our first conversation about international parental child abduction, Carlos mentioned something called the Central Authority. And there is a U.S. Central Authority, there is a Mexican Central Authority, and there are central authorities for any nation that is acceded to something called the Hague Convention. So help us out. What is the Hague Convention, and why optimistically is that a helpful mechanism for resolving abductions between countries? And then we'll talk about the challenges.
Okay, so the Hague abduction is an international treaty between countries all over the globe. It's an agreement that they will work together to resolve IPCA cases. So there's a process that they must follow. The residents in those countries that are signatory to the Hague Convention file an application, and then it will be reviewed by the central authority of that country.
Okay, right. Well, that sounds really easy. That sounds just like, woo, 6 weeks and we're done. So Brenda, what are some of the challenges that you've discovered as you have researched this issue?
So what I've discovered is that they're not consistent. The central authorities range from different countries, especially because of the setup of their government. Even with the U.S. being one of the leading countries of the world, you would think that we're the best. I mean, we are the best in applying the Hague Abduction Convention Treaty. However, we're still lagging behind in positive results for resolving IPCA cases throughout the year. So I would say inefficiency in applying the Hague Abduction Convention, as well as other related IPCA laws, as well as I would just say just a lot of inconsistency between federal workers. So yeah, that's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you. And Carlos, that leads right back to one of your initial comments. And you mentioned maybe this is a good time to segue into Amparo, but by way of that, so you discussed variation from Mexican state to Mexican state in how these cases are handled, how children are perceived within this case structure. So could you talk a little bit about variation and what that means for proper I don't know if proper is the right word, for implementation of the Hague Convention to resolve these cases?
Sure thing. Well, to start, you guys need to know that we have 32 different state jurisdictions. So you got to handle 32 different family code, 32 different familiar processal code, how to handle the civil and the family law. Also, out of these 32 states or jurisdictions, only 11 states include just a little bit of international parental child abduction under, regulations. And out of these 11, it's so poor, the legislation, so bad, getting a lot of confused indeed. So what is happening in Mexico, it's since we don't have a federal regulation regarding IPCA, normally federal courts or Supreme Court have to make a final call, like to do the interpretation of this law or this treaty. We only have also 60 interpretation of the convention, which is, it's nothing, because the convention is 46 articles and we only have 60 different interpretations from Supreme Court or from federal court. So it's still a lot of job to do regarding this. Something that it's very important regarding the Amparo, I do love Amparo. It can help you in a lot of things, but I don't like that the Amparo holds these cases for years. And when I say for years, it's, you can submit an Amparo for every single detail of the case. For example, right now, I think I talked to you, sister, about a case that I am handling for a client in Germany. it was amazing because we submit the case October 13, 2020. By October 23rd, 2020, means 10 days after we submit the case, we won the case. Beautiful resolution, beautiful resolution. But then appeal, amparo, amparo, appeal. So I think up to date, we have 40 different cases out of that resolution, out of that single case. And the girls are still, they're still in Mexico. So why? Because the amparo after amparo, then after amparo, then after amparo. So again, it's a good legal remedy, it's a federal one that can help. But I'm pretty sure with a lot of job, we have to convince Supreme Court to stop or to tell federal courts, do not hold the minors, in the restitution case. Once a resolution is in place, just allow the resolution, allow the minors to get back to their countries, and then they can fight overseas, But yeah, I think it's, and again, I'm seeing my notes, sadly, still some corruption in some jurisdiction. That's huge as well, for these cases. So, yeah.
Thank you. I hear frustration in your voice when you're talking about amparo. And again, for some of us who this is our first experience with this issue, if I understand it correctly, and Carlos, please help if we need a little further clarification. This, even if there is a judgment that has been rendered that would return a child, the amparo is an appeal process of sorts that can continue to delay the enforcement of an order that would send children home. Is that accurate?
It's that kind of, there is no translation for amparo. It can be an appeal, but appeal goes to a state jurisdiction, and the amparo always goes to jurisdiction. That's why it calls amparo. And again, it's kind of similar. I think you have your habeas corpus goes to federal court. So it's pretty similar. And yeah, because once you submit this amparo, you can order to stop any intent to get the children back to their country of habitual residence. And a federal judge will issue and say, okay, don't send back those children until I make my final decision on this. Okay. So, and that can take years. I can tell you years and years. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for the clarification. So perhaps a stay would be a term that some of us would be familiar with in a court setting where an order is stayed pending another review. And the other thing that you said is so important for every one of us as we're learning more about international parental child abduction is time. Time is absolutely against reunifications. The longer it is protracted in the courts, so often, not always, but often the less likely a reunification can occur within an expedient manner, if at all. And as Brenda suggested earlier, some of that is court variation in how they interpret the Hague Convention, if there is a Hague Convention that governs how children are returned. Importantly, not all nations are signatories to the Hague. And in my case, when my daughter was abducted to Mali, Mali is not a signatory to this to this treaty that nations cooperate, and there was not a bilateral agreement as well. We had to work through diplomatic and other means to do it. And so again, as Brenda indicated, this is a highly complex issue, and it involves courts at local and sometimes at a federal level. It involves two or more nations. And it's just important for us because sometimes a question that well-meaning people ask is, well, why can't you just go get them? Why can't you just go get your son or daughter? And you're hearing from Brenda and Carlos from the perspective of just one nation, why that is not always easy. So I think we have time for a couple more questions, and I want to, if there are questions that you have, if you drop them in the chat, perhaps we will have time for them. But I wanted to come back to Brenda. Brenda, so again, we've been working on analyzing data from the State Department, and Mexico is still one of the top destination countries for abduction to the United States, and vice versa, by the way. it definitely goes both ways. What are some of the reasons why you think that is, or why we know that is rather, why is Mexico a top destination country? And then what might we do from a prevention perspective?
Why it's so common, I would say because we're right next door to Mexico. It's so easy to either leave the US or let's say cross the border with a stolen child into the US. But I would say to reduce the numbers of abducted children by parents and to maintain children at their habitual residence, the central authorities for both countries should have an in-depth evaluation for how they implement the Hague Abduction Convention and all IPCA related laws. So we can identify specific problems that parents face as roadblocks when they're trying to resolve their case. And so we're able to have a starting point to fix the issues. So it is important to understand that on a national scale, it might seem like a small problem, but to these affected families and the seeking parents, it's their entire world crumbling around them.
Very important. Perspective is very important there. And one of the things we've also been examining is, at least from the US perspective, how we can better prevent children from being abducted at exit points, at airports, at land borders, providing documentation and passports, making sure that, you know, there are certain, something called euphemistically a no-fly list. It's really called a prevent abduction program, but there are federal programs that are seeking to reduce this. I think we have time. Yeah, yes, Carlos.
Yeah, and you know, just to add to Brenda's comment, it's I would say neither Mexico or states have exit control.
Yes, yes.
With my ones since babies in and out, Mexico, USA, Mexico, USA, just with the passport. But what surprised me recently, it's a friend of mine asked me to travel with his daughter. You know, I say, okay, she's not my girl. You need to issue a letter, you know, telling authorities that she can travel with me, that I'm a friend, and I'm gonna be traveling from this day to this day. So we exit Seattle. No one asked me for that letter. We entered to Mexico. No one asked me for that letter. So we left Mexico. No one asked me for that letter. We entered to the States. No one asked me for that letter. So I was in shock, you know, because with my kids, I'm used to it, you know, but with a minor that she's not even my kid, no one asked me for anything but the passport. I think a good initiative should be exit control, you know, for minors. So you want to take your own minor, you have to have a notarized letter from the other party, from mom or from dad, you know, writing that permit, that authorization, where to go, which days, from where to where, etc. As you know, as many details as possible. This is not gonna avoid the potential, you know, subtraction or detention, wrongful retention in the other country, but at least it's something. And this is very important to have as a lawyer, you know, when you go to court, like, okay, here is the letter, you know, specific letter, and he's violating or he is violating this letter. So I think exit control can be a key to prevent this crime. So yeah, and it's very simple. It's just a matter of, you know, ask for that letter, you know, but ask for that letter. So
there's one question in the chat, and then I want to end. I do believe that we have a father that has tuned in today who is trying to prevent their children from being re-abducted to Mexico. And so I want to give final word to Carlos with any suggestions that you have for him. And please, if you are on this call, please do contact us. We can help. We can help. So the question in the chat is, and it's very important, what are the challenges for abducted children after their reunification with their parents and community, including schools? This is a fundamental question, and I'm so glad that it was asked, because our motto at I Stand Parent Network, the NGO that I helped to co-found, is children do come home, period. You know, we have that declarative statement because for us, that has to be the only mindset, and that has to be the only option, just in an ideal and in a practical sense. When children come home, they have suffered. You know, the trauma of being separated from one parent or another, from grandparents, from siblings, from schools, from communities, is profound from both nations. Because children who were abducted to one nation, and we'll just continue to use the U.S. and Mexico as an example, children abducted from the U.S. to Mexico, maybe they don't know the family. Maybe they have to go into another school system, and we know the challenges of that. And then they come home and they're reunited. Maybe the other parent has not spoken kindly, or, you know, created stories, and so they have suffered from parental alienation. They do suffer. And while it's very important for us to acknowledge that they're home, there needs to be aftercare. Our I Stand Parent Network, for example, is launching our very first summer camp this summer in New York City for survivors of abduction. Right now we have 4, and hopefully we'll have some more. But it's very important that those children and the whole family receives wraparound services, counseling, if it's at all possible to still maintain the relationship some way with the other parent, is so important. Like Carlos said, we don't want to go from one extreme to another. We don't want you to have one parent and then the other and not having both. And so, you know, it's very important that that reunification be helpful for everyone. And then there's one other question in the chat from Cooper. Hey, Cooper. Does U.S. Customs Sister have an Amber Alert system? No, they don't have that, but there is a program, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about it, excuse me. It's called the Prevent Abduction Program, and it is a program out of the Department of Homeland Security, Customs and Border Protection. It was mandated into law in 2014 by something called the Goldman Act. And essentially what it is a no-fly list or an at-risk list for children who may be at risk for abduction. And this is in the United States. I don't know if there's something proximal in Mexico, but if a parent who suspects their children are at risk for abduction, they can get a court order that, as Carlos says, has very specific travel restraint language, and they can enroll that child in this federal program. And if another parent or relative tries to take that child out of the US border and they're in the program, it's very likely that they will be stopped. Now, the problem is that a lot of parents don't know about it. And so as Director Scheib talked earlier, awareness is very important all around on this issue. And the TSA agents should be asking like challenging questions. My heart was broken again and again when Carlos talked about being able to travel with someone else's child and not being asked at either port of entry or exit to prove that they could travel with this child. TSA agents are supposed to ask a series of challenging questions. They're supposed to ask the child questions to verify that they know this person and they're supposed to travel. They're supposed to ask the adult for proof of travel. And whenever I travel, I always test this when I'm traveling with my daughter. Some airports are good about asking it and some are not. And so that was a good question, and sorry for a long answer. There is a prevention program, and our TSA agents are supposed to be stopping and asking these questions at the border. We're just about at the end. Oh, yes, Carlos. Mm-hmm.
We don't have that in Mexico. To answer your question regarding this, we have something similar in Mexico. We don't have that program in Mexico.
You don't have that program. It's something for us to keep working on.
No.
And I'm so grateful for the conversations that you're having with your colleagues. And even I know that you've had conversations with federal officials on any number of points here. And so I'm grateful that we'll keep working together. And so, Carlos, I want to ask you this question. I do believe that we have a father, as I indicated, if he's not on the line, he certainly will be watching after this is over, whose children were abducted to Mexico, and going through many of the processes which you indicated, he was actually able to secure his children's return to the United States. But it's our understanding that he is now very fearful because the taking parent has now returned to the United States, and he's worried that the children are going to be abducted all over again. Now, I have some suggestions offline for him for getting him into this program, getting the kids into this prevent abduction program. But do you have any suggestions for this parent or any that might be worried about this happening with their children?
Not to trust her. Basically, he cannot trust mom again. I will say not allow the children, to get older so they can communicate with him directly. If there is no option for the travel with the mother to Mexico again, make sure to go to court and get, a resolution from court, pronunciation at least that the habitual resident, it's the United States, and that the minors will be traveling with mom to this specific date, to this specific date, to this specific city, to this specific city, where the children will be, staying in Mexico, and have a lot of reserves regarding that. It's hard to trust a parent again, when they already commit this crime against the children and the left behind parents. Yeah, it's not easy. So yeah, that would be it.
That just echoes what, as a parent, I know, when someone, and I think I'm borrowing from a quote from Maya Angelou, when someone shows you who they are, believe them. If it has happened, it can happen again. And we hate that would be the case. But if you even suspect that this is happening, as Carlos says, as I implore, as the best practice suggests, you must take proactive action, get airtight language, enroll them in prevention programs. If they are able to travel, and this is not just Mexico, any country, if they are able to travel with the country, because sometimes judges, against all and attorneys and all a parent's pleas, will allow that child to travel, and then they don't come back. And so, yeah, and it's very unfortunate. At ISTAN, we deal with this all too often. We had a case of 3 children who were abducted to Lebanon, and they are home, thank goodness, by the attorney who was on the last GPI, who helped to bring them home. But the mother pleaded to no avail with the judge not to allow the children to travel to Lebanon, but the judge allowed it anyway. And so prevention is better than the cure in this case. And so we certainly hope that. There was one other question in the chat, and thank you to Ms. Shai for allowing us time for this. So David asked if there is an effort to determine which parent is providing the best care and home for the child. I can answer that generally, and then maybe Carlos, I'll repeat the question. Maybe you can answer it specific to the cases that you know that you have worked with, or maybe what the practice is in Mexico. So again, the question is, are there efforts to determine which parent is providing the best care and home for the child? Typically, that is a part of, it shouldn't be a part of a Hague Convention. Let me just say that right away. Because in a Hague case, none of that is of question. The only question that should be asked in a Hague case decision is where the child's habitual residence is, where the child has spent most of their life. Where is that? And if that habitual residence is not in the country of abduction, the judge must order the child return to their country of habitual residence. And then all of those other questions about best interest of the child can be answered. And so the Hague Convention is silent on the best interest of the child. And from our perspective, it should be, because that is what family courts are for. And that is ideal, but those types of questions come up all the time in Hague cases, and they shouldn't. Carlos.
Yeah, and just right away, that's not a Hague Convention issue. It's habitual resident. That's it, period. And the best interest of the child, even Mexican Supreme Court decide that best Mexican authorities should protect that best interest by returning that child right away. So that's a rule from Mexican Supreme Court. But sadly, many authorities, they ignore this pronunciation from Mexican Supreme Court, and they make excuses, and then make trouble, and then another amparo, and then another amparo. So yeah, it's a huge challenge, to talk to authorities and tell them, you know, this is not a local dispute. This is not about who is better. No? This is about habitual resident and to implement the convention. That's all. You know, you cannot distract yourself with other local issues, with other familiar issues. You have to treat your case as an international case. Otherwise, you are gonna have a lot of headaches, believe me. So yeah.
I think we have come to the end of this quite remarkable time, and I have learned, I've been an advocate by choice and by circumstance for almost a decade, but I'm learning things here today. I have learned more information here today. And so I want to thank Brenda and Carlos. And I just want to end with an anecdote, the way that I met Carlos and what panelist was not able to come was an example of a reunification. And so we first met Carlos when he was working with a father who was seeking to return his children from Mexico, and the mother had taken the children there. Without disclosing any identifying information, it took some time. It took a number of years, but they were successful in the court, and in the most ideal resolution, it took a little while, but that family is now back together and they're raising those children together. And for us, it's always about, can the children have both parents in their lives? Can they have both families in their lives? And even after an abduction, that is possible. It shouldn't be as rare as it is, but it is. And so Carlos, I just wanted to reflect back on that again, children do come home. Thank you so much for your time. Brenda, thank you for your incredible investment and research this semester, and your work is going to live on. You know that we are doing other things with it. Members of Congress have received some of your policy work. And finally, Ms. Shipe, thank you. Thank you so much to Global Ties Alabama for being not just interested, but an advocate for this issue and educating and building these global ties on this particular issue. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you.